The autumn leaves crunched beneath Sarah Mitchell's feet as she walked up the familiar brick pathway to her childhood home in Westerville, Ohio. The October air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter, but nothing could have prepared her for the chill she was about to feel from her own family. Margaret, her older sister by 3 years, opened the door before Sarah could even knock. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and her designer sweater spoke of the comfortable life she'd built as a real estate agent in the upscale Dublin suburb. But her eyes held none of the warmth Sarah had hoped for. "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice flat and unwelcoming. She didn't step aside to let her in. "Hey, Maggie," Sarah replied, using her sister's childhood nickname in an attempt to soften whatever tension hung in the air. "I got your message about discussing the reunion plans. I have some great ideas for—" "That's what I need to talk to you about," Margaret interrupted, finally stepping back to allow Sarah into the foyer. The house smelled of vanilla candles and fresh coffee, scents that should have been comforting, but somehow felt oppressive in this moment. They sat in Margaret's pristine living room, where every throw pillow was perfectly positioned, and not a speck of dust could be found on the glass coffee table. Family photos lined the mantel, but Sarah noticed with a sinking feeling that most of the recent ones featured Margaret's family prominently, while she appeared in only a few background shots. "The thing is, Sarah," Margaret began, her manicured fingers drumming against her coffee mug, "this year's reunion is going to be different, more intimate. We've decided to keep it smaller." Sarah felt her stomach drop. For 23 years, since their grandmother had started the tradition, the Mitchell family reunion had been held every October at the community center in downtown Westerville. It was the one time all year when cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends gathered together. Sarah looked forward to it more than Christmas. "Smaller how?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew exactly what Margaret meant. Margaret cleared her throat and avoided eye contact. "Well, with Mom and Dad's health concerns and everything going on with Uncle Robert's family, we thought it would be better to just have immediate family. You know, keep it simple." "I am immediate family, Maggie." The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Outside, Sarah could hear children playing in the neighborhood, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Look, Sarah," Margaret finally said, setting down her mug with more force than necessary. "We all know how these things go when you're around. There's always some kind of drama, some issue that needs to be addressed. Mom's stress levels, Dad's heart condition. We just can't handle that kind of tension this year." Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. "Drama? What drama? I've never caused drama at family gatherings." "Oh, come on," Margaret scoffed, finally looking directly at her sister. "Last year you spent the entire time complaining about your job situation. The year before that, you brought up all that stuff about Mom playing favorites when we were kids. People don't come to family gatherings to deal with your personal issues." Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks. "I was going through a difficult time with the layoffs at the marketing firm. I thought my family would be supportive. And the conversation about Mom wasn't me bringing up stuff. It came up naturally when Cousin Julie was talking about her own childhood." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You always have to defend yourself. Always have to make everything about you. This reunion is about celebrating family, not rehashing old grievances." Sarah stood up abruptly, her hands shaking with a mixture of hurt and anger. "So your solution is to just not invite me, your own sister?" "It's not permanent," Margaret said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Maybe next year, when things are more settled." "Things?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "What things? My life? My right to exist in this family?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. You're not being exiled from the family. We're just having a small gathering this year. You can see everyone individually throughout the year." As Sarah gathered her purse and jacket, she noticed Margaret watching her with something that looked almost like satisfaction. It was then that Sarah realized this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, or even about keeping the reunion small. This was calculated. This was Margaret exercising the control she'd always craved over family dynamics. "Who else knows about this?" Sarah asked quietly. Margaret's slight hesitation told Sarah everything she needed to know. "The people who need to know, know." Sarah walked to the door, her heart breaking with each step. As she reached for the handle, she turned back one more time. "You know, Maggie, I always looked up to you when we were kids. I thought you were the smartest, strongest person I knew. I never imagined you'd become someone who could be this cruel." Margaret's face flickered with something, guilt, perhaps, or regret, but it was gone so quickly Sarah might have imagined it. It's not cruel, Sarah. It's practical. As Sarah drove home through the winding streets of her own neighborhood in Clintonville, tears blurred her vision. The familiar landmarks, the coffee shop where she'd had her first date, the park where her family used to have picnics, the library where she'd spent countless hours as a child, all felt tainted now by the knowledge that she was no longer welcome at the gathering that had defined her understanding of family for more than 2 decades. Her small apartment felt even smaller when she walked in, the silence overwhelming after the emotional confrontation. Sarah sank onto her couch and stared at the calendar on her wall, where she'd circled October 15th in red marker with "Family Reunion" written in her enthusiastic handwriting. But as she sat there in the growing darkness, something else began to grow alongside her hurt, a determination she hadn't felt in years. If Margaret wanted to play games with family loyalty, if she wanted to decide who was worthy of being included in the Mitchell family traditions, then maybe it was time for Sarah to remind everyone exactly what family was supposed to mean. She reached for her laptop and began scrolling through her contacts. If Margaret was planning a small, exclusive gathering, then Sarah would show her what inclusion really looked like. Chapter 2. The plan takes shape. The next morning, Sarah woke with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in months. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, illuminating the small but cozy space she'd created in her Clintonville apartment. The walls were covered with photos from past family reunions, each one a testament to the bonds Margaret was now trying to sever. After her morning coffee and a quick shower, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, a notepad, and her grandmother's old address book, a weathered blue leather journal that contained the contact information for every branch of the Mitchell family tree. Her grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, had been the heart of their family. She'd started the reunion tradition in 2000, just 2 years before she passed away, as a way to keep the extended family connected, as everyone spread out across Ohio and beyond. Eleanor had always said that family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up for each other, especially when times were tough. Sarah ran her fingers over her grandmother's careful handwriting, remembering the woman who had never met a person she couldn't make feel welcome. Eleanor would have been horrified by Margaret's exclusion tactics. "Okay, Grandma," Sarah whispered to the empty kitchen. "Let's see who really believes in family." She started with her cousin David, Margaret's own son, who was now 25 and working as a teacher in Cincinnati. David had always been close to Sarah, often texting her about his classroom experiences and asking for advice about lesson planning since Sarah's background in marketing had given her skills in presentation and communication. "Hey, David," she typed into her phone. "Hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out about this year's family reunion. I heard your mom is planning something smaller this year, but I'm organizing a gathering too, and wanted to make sure you knew about both options. Would love to catch up either way." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Next, she called her Aunt Linda, her father's sister, who lived in Toledo. Linda had always been the rebel of the family, the one who'd married young, traveled extensively, and never quite fit Margaret's idea of what a Mitchell woman should be. "Sarah," Linda's warm voice filled the line. "What a wonderful surprise. I was just thinking about you yesterday." "Hi, Aunt Linda. I'm calling about the family reunion. Have you talked to Margaret about it yet?" There was a pause. "Well, yes. She called last week. Said they were keeping it small this year. Just the immediate Columbus area family." Linda's tone had shifted, becoming more cautious. "She said you were okay with that arrangement." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm definitely not okay with it, actually. She told me I wasn't invited." "What?" Linda's voice rose sharply. "That's ridiculous. You're Eleanor's granddaughter. This whole tradition was her idea." "I know. That's why I'm calling. I'm planning my own gathering for the same day. A real family reunion where everyone is welcome. Would you be interested in coming?" "Absolutely," Linda said without hesitation. "This is exactly the kind of nonsense your grandmother would have put a stop to immediately. Count me and Tom in. And Sarah? I'm going to make some calls." Over the next 3 hours, Sarah worked her way through the address book. Some conversations were easier than others. Her cousin Mark in Dayton was immediately on board, expressing his own frustration with Margaret's increasingly controlling behavior at family events. Her great-aunt Rose in Cleveland was delighted to hear from her, and admitted she'd been hurt that her invitation had seemed so lukewarm and last minute, but it was her conversation with her own parents that proved most challenging. "Sarah, honey," her mother's voice was tired when she answered the phone. At 71, Helen Mitchell had been battling diabetes and high blood pressure, and the stress of family conflict was the last thing she needed. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" "Oh, Good days and bad days. Your father is out getting groceries. His back's been acting up again. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. Maybe Margaret had a point about their parents' stress levels, but then she remembered all the times her parents had lit up when the whole family was together, how her father would spend weeks preparing his famous barbecue sauce for the reunion. Mom, I wanted to talk to you about the reunion. Margaret told me she's planning something smaller this year. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. She said you agreed it would be better that way. That's not exactly what happened. Mom, she told me I wasn't welcome because I caused too much drama. Oh, Sarah. Her mother's voice broke slightly. That can't be right. Margaret wouldn't say something like that. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pattern of her family's dynamics. Margaret had always been the golden child, successful, organized, living the life their parents had envisioned. Sarah, with her creative career, her apartment instead of a house, her series of relationships that hadn't led to marriage, had always been seen as the less stable one. Mom, I'm planning my own gathering. Same day, same time, but at the Westerville Community Center like we always used to. I've already booked it. I want you and Dad there. Honey, I don't know if we can handle 2 different events. You don't have to handle 2 events. You just have to choose which one represents what Grandma Eleanor wanted this family to be. After she hung up, Sarah felt emotionally drained but determined. She'd spoken to 15 family members so far, and 12 had committed to her reunion. The momentum was building. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Aunt Sarah, I had no idea Mom excluded you. That's really messed up. I'll be at your reunion for sure, and I'm bringing my girlfriend. Mom never invites her anyway because she thinks we're too young to be serious. Another text came from her cousin Jessica in Akron. Just talked to Mom. Aunt Linda. We're driving down together. This is exactly what Grandma Eleanor would have wanted. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's apartment became a planning headquarters. She spread out papers on her dining table, seating charts, menu ideas, activity plans. She called the community center to confirm the rental, arranged for catering from the local deli that had always provided food for the reunion, and even contacted the DJ who'd played music at the last 3 gatherings. Her phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID. Margaret. Sarah. Her sister's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. What exactly do you think you're doing? I'm planning a family reunion. You know, like Grandma Eleanor would have wanted. You're being vindictive and childish, and you're putting our parents in an impossible position. Sarah felt her own anger flare. I'm being vindictive. You're the one who decided to exclude your own sister from a family tradition because you don't like my personality. This isn't about your personality, Sarah. It's about keeping the peace. Whose peace? Margaret? Yours? Because from where I'm sitting, you're the only one who benefits from keeping me away. There was a long pause. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had taken on the condescending tone that had driven Sarah crazy since childhood. Fine, have your little gathering, but don't come crying to me when it falls apart and no one shows up. After Margaret hung up, Sarah stared at her phone for a moment, then smiled grimly. She pulled up her contact list and began typing a group text to everyone she'd spoken with. Mitchell Family Reunion, October 15th, 1 p.m., Westerville Community Center. Come celebrate what family really means. Love you all. As the sun set over Clintonville, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The power that came from standing up for herself and for what was right. Margaret might have the perfect house and the successful career, but Sarah had something more valuable. The courage to fight for the family values their grandmother had instilled in them. The real test would come in 2 weeks, when they'd discover which vision of family would prevail. Chapter 3. The Day of Reckoning. October 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made Ohio autumns feel magical. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing between excitement and anxiety about what the day would bring. She'd spent the previous evening at the community center, decorating with fall flowers and setting up tables, her hands shaking slightly, as she arranged the name tags she'd printed for everyone who'd confirmed their attendance. By 11:30 a.m., she was back at the center, wearing her grandmother's vintage pearl necklace for courage and a burgundy sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. The catering truck had arrived on schedule, filling the familiar space with the aroma of comfort food that had always been a reunion staple: pulled pork, coleslaw, baked beans, and the apple pie that Eleanor had always insisted was essential for any proper family gathering. Sarah's phone had been buzzing all morning with confirmations and updates. David was driving up from Cincinnati with his girlfriend Emma. Aunt Linda and Uncle Tom were bringing a carload of cousins from Toledo. Even her great-uncle Frank from Dayton, who rarely attended family events anymore, had called to say he wouldn't miss this for the world. At 12:45, Sarah stood by the entrance, greeting early arrivals with hugs that felt more genuine than any she'd received at family gatherings in years. Cousin Mark arrived with his twin teenage daughters, both excited to see family they hadn't connected with in months due to Margaret's increasingly exclusive gathering style. Jessica pulled up with Aunt Linda, their car windows down and music playing, their laughter filling the parking lot. "Sarah!" Aunt Linda enveloped her in a hug that smelled of familiar perfume and home. "The place looks beautiful. Eleanor would be so proud." As more family members arrived, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening. Conversations were flowing more freely than they had in years. Without Margaret's subtle control over interactions, her way of steering conversations away from topics she deemed inappropriate or managing who talked to whom, people were connecting in ways that felt natural and unforced. David introduced Emma to everyone with obvious pride, and Sarah watched her future cousin-in-law light up as she was welcomed warmly into the family circle. At Margaret's smaller gatherings, Emma had always been treated as a temporary fixture, someone to be polite to, but not truly include. At 1:15, Sarah's phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah's heart clenched with hope and dread. "Mom? Honey, we're in the parking lot." Helen's voice was shaky but determined. "Your father and we've been sitting here for 10 minutes trying to decide what to do." Sarah could see her parents' blue sedan through the window, parked near the far edge of the lot. "What's happening?" "Mom? Margaret called us this morning. She was upset. She said we had to choose between her gathering and yours, that we couldn't do both. She said if we came to yours, we weren't welcome at hers." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a familiar surge of anger at her sister's manipulation tactics. "Mom, you don't have to choose sides. This isn't about taking sides." "But she said it was, honey. She said you were trying to destroy the family, that this was all some kind of revenge plot against her." Through the window, Sarah could see her father, Robert, getting out of the car slowly, his arthritis making movement difficult. At 73, he'd been the peacekeeper in their family for decades, always trying to smooth over conflicts between his daughters. "I'll be right out," Sarah told her mother. She walked across the parking lot, her heart pounding with each step. Her parents stood by their car, looking older and more fragile than she'd remembered. The stress of the family conflict was etched in the lines around their eyes. "Dad," she said, reaching for his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm watching my family fall apart," he said quietly. "Sarah, what happened between you and your sister? Really happened?" Sarah took a deep breath and told them the truth, all of it. Margaret's cruel words, her systematic exclusion, the way she'd been trying to control family dynamics for years. As she spoke, she watched her parents' expressions change from confusion to hurt to something that looked like recognition. "She's been doing this for a while, hasn't she?" her mother said quietly, "making decisions about who gets invited to what, who gets included in family plans." Sarah nodded. "Remember last Christmas when Cousin Beth didn't come? Margaret told her it would be too crowded with her new baby. Remember when Uncle Frank stopped coming to Easter dinner? Margaret said it was because he was getting too old to enjoy it, but he told me she never actually invited him." Her father ran a weathered hand through his thinning hair. "We just wanted to keep the peace, Sarah. We thought if we stayed out of it—" "I know, Dad, but staying out of it meant letting Margaret decide who deserves to be part of this family." Helen Mitchell straightened her shoulders in a gesture Sarah remembered from childhood. The same movement her mother made when she decided to stand up to a difficult neighbor or advocate for her daughters at school. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of what Margaret's done," she said firmly. "Eleanor started these reunions because she believed family meant everyone, no exceptions." As they walked toward the community center together, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Inside, the reaction to her parents' arrival was immediate and joyful. Family members who hadn't seen them in months rushed over with hugs and questions about their health. Robert's face lit up as his nephews pulled him into conversation about his latest woodworking projects, and Helen found herself surrounded by cousins eager to hear about her garden and her volunteer work at the local food bank. The afternoon unfolded like the family reunion Sarah remembered from childhood. Stories were shared, photo albums were passed around, and 3 generations of Mitchells filled the space with laughter and love. Sarah's great-aunt Rose, now 87, held court at one table with tales of the family's early days in Ohio, while the teenagers clustered around David and Emma, fascinated by stories of teaching in inner-city Cincinnati. Around 3:30, Sarah was refilling the coffee station when Aunt Linda approached her with a knowing smile. "You might want to look out the window," Linda said, nodding toward the parking lot. Sarah peered through the glass and felt her stomach drop. Margaret's silver SUV was parked near the entrance, and she could see her sister sitting in the driver's seat, talking animatedly on her phone. Next to her sat Sarah's brother-in-law, Paul, looking uncomfortable. "How long have they been there?" Sarah asked. "About 10 minutes. I think she's trying to figure out what to do." As if summoned by their conversation, Margaret's phone call ended. She sat in the car for another moment, then slowly got out. Paul followed, his reluctance visible even from a distance. Sarah's heart raced as Margaret approached the entrance. She looked perfectly put together as always, but there was something different in her posture, a hesitation that Sarah had rarely seen in her confident older sister. Margaret paused at the entrance, scanning the room through the glass doors. Sarah could see her taking in the scene, their parents laughing with family members, cousins catching up over shared memories, children playing games while adults supervised with fond smiles. It was everything a family reunion should be, and Margaret had almost destroyed it. When Margaret finally entered, the room didn't fall silent dramatically. Instead, there was a subtle shift in energy, conversations continuing but with an underlying awareness that something significant was happening. Margaret walked directly to Sarah, her usual commanding presence somewhat diminished. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. They stepped outside onto the small patio area behind the community center, where the October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. For a moment, neither sister spoke, the weight of weeks of hurt and anger hanging between them. "There are 50 people in there," Margaret said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 52. "Actually," Sarah replied, "Uncle Frank brought his new neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She just moved here from California and doesn't have family nearby." Margaret's carefully composed expression cracked slightly. "I had 8 people at my gathering. 8. Sarah felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. "I'm sorry it didn't work out the way you planned." "Are you?" Margaret's voice sharpened with familiar defensiveness. "Because this feels like exactly what you wanted, to make me look bad, to prove some point about who the real family favorite is." "No, Margaret." Sarah's voice was steady, strengthened by the love and support she'd felt all day. "This was never about making you look bad. This was about showing what family actually means, what Grandma Eleanor taught us it should mean." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at the trees that bordered the community center property. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than Sarah had heard it in years. "I was so afraid," she said. "After Mom and Dad started having health problems, after everyone started getting older and moving away, I thought if I didn't control things, if I didn't manage every detail, the family would just fall apart. But you can't control people into loving each other, Maggie. Love doesn't work that way." Margaret's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in years, Sarah saw not the successful real estate agent or the controlling sister, but the scared little girl who had always felt responsible for keeping everyone together. "I've made such a mess of everything," Margaret whispered. Before Sarah could respond, the patio door opened, and their father appeared. Robert Mitchell looked between his daughters with the expression of a man who had waited long enough for his family to heal itself. "Your mother sent me out here," he said. "She said I should tell you both that life's too short for this nonsense, and your grandmother would box both your ears if she could see what's been happening. Despite everything." Both sisters smiled at that. Eleanor Mitchell had been barely 5 feet tall, but she'd been a force of nature when it came to family harmony. "She also said," their father continued, "that there's apple pie in there, and if you two don't come in and have some together, she's going to eat your pieces herself." Margaret looked at Sarah with eyes that held years of regret and a tentative hope for forgiveness. Would it be okay if I stayed? If Paul and I stayed for the rest of the reunion? Sarah didn't hesitate. "Of course. You're family, Maggie. You'll always be family." As they walked back inside together, Sarah felt the last pieces of her heart's puzzle clicking into place. The room welcomed Margaret not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet acceptance that true families offer each other, even after mistakes and hurt feelings. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of reconnection and rediscovered joy. Margaret helped serve dessert, her efficient organizing skills channeled into something positive for the first time in months. She apologized quietly to family members she'd excluded or made feel unwelcome, her words simple but sincere. As the sun began to set and families started gathering their belongings, Sarah found herself standing with her sister by the memory table they'd set up in Eleanor's honor, looking at photos spanning decades of Mitchell family gatherings. "Next year," Margaret said softly. "We planned this together. All of it. From the beginning." Sarah nodded, feeling the promise of healing in those words. "Together," she agreed. The October evening was growing cool as the last cars pulled out of the parking lot, but Sarah felt warmer than she had in years. She'd fought for her family and won, not by defeating Margaret, but by reminding everyone, including her sister, what family really meant. Chapter 4: A New Beginning. 3 months later, on a snowy January afternoon, Sarah sat in her Clintonville apartment, opening Christmas cards that were still trickling in. The holidays had been different this year. Better, more connected, more like the family gatherings she remembered from her childhood. Margaret had hosted Christmas dinner, but this time she'd asked for help instead of trying to control every detail, and the result had been a celebration that felt both elegant and welcoming. A knock at her door interrupted her card reading. Through the peephole, she saw Margaret standing in the hallway, stamping snow off her boots and balancing what looked like a large photo album in her arms. "Maggie?" Sarah opened the door, surprised. Her sister didn't usually make unannounced visits. "Hi," Margaret said, looking slightly nervous. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I have something I wanted to show you." Sarah stepped aside to let her in, noting that Margaret looked more relaxed than she had in years. Her usually perfect hair was slightly mussed from the winter wind, and she was wearing jeans and a casual sweater instead of her typical business attire. "Coffee?" Sarah offered. "That would be great." As Sarah prepared their drinks, Margaret settled onto the couch and opened the album she'd brought. When Sarah joined her with 2 steaming mugs, she saw that it was filled with photos from the October reunion, pictures she didn't even know had been taken. "David gave me copies of all the photos he took," Margaret explained, "and Aunt Linda sent me the ones she had. I thought you should have an album of your own." Sarah flipped through the pages, her heart swelling as she saw captured moments from that transformative day. There was a photo of her great-uncle Frank, laughing with Mrs. Chen, the neighbor he'd brought who had become a regular fixture at family gatherings since then. Another showed David and Emma surrounded by cousins, all of them beaming. Her favorite was a candid shot of their parents sitting together, holding hands and watching their family with obvious contentment.